Sound check? All right. All righty. Good morning. My name is Steve Maher. I'm with Risk Management Professionals, and I'd like to introduce you to our ongoing series of webcasts dealing with process safety and risk management issues. Little change of plans this morning. Teresa Marion will be running a little bit late, so I'll be covering her presentation and working you through the SPCC plan, providing an overview and a few tips. She'll probably be joining us in process, and will also be helping answer any questions you might have towards the end. The overall format, for those of you who haven't participated in our webinars, is that there'll be a general presentation to provide background information, tips, things that we hope are very useful to you. And because it's a live webinar and it provides for interaction, we do have to keep you on mute during the course of the presentation so that other people who are listening aren't interrupted by your phone calls, external meetings, or whatever else might be going on in your office. At the end of the presentation, we'll open it up for question and answer. You can ask our webcast producer, Nicolo Tromba, via chat window to unmute you so you can ask the question directly, or you can post the question to her via the chat window. She'll revocalize it for the group, and then what we'll do is go ahead and address the issue and help out as much as we can. I guess that's about it. And so if you do have any troubles, the number on the screen can be called for technical assistance, or this particular broadcast is being broadcast from Southern California, so you can call our office directly at 949-282-0123. So without further ado, let me go ahead and get started. Again, my name is Steve Maher, and Teresa will be joining us in process. The key topics I'd like to go over with you is basically I'd like to overview the oil pollution regulations, a little bit of background, where they're coming from, why they're important, and what the regulators are really expecting from you, SPCC plan requirements, and also some various tips for facility walkdowns and also field verification. One of the reasons why it's important, as those of you who've been watching the events from April 20th, 2010, with the Macondo well release after the Deepwater Horizon accident, there's an increased attention towards oil spills and their potential impact on the environment. There have been actually a number of events in history in the United States, from the spill from platform A21 off the coast of California to the release into the Monongahela River in Floreffe, Pennsylvania, all the way to current activities that really emphasize the potential significant impact of oil spills on the environment, which of course precipitates not just a puristic environmental impact, but a significant impact on the livelihood, on people who are in proximity to that. And that's notwithstanding to the fact that in many cases there may be accidents associated with that. Let's not remember 11 lives were lost in the Deepwater Horizon event last April. So when things like this happen, there's a lot of media focus. It doesn't do the environment any good. It doesn't do the people affected any good. It doesn't do the individuals who may be in proximity or may be dependent on those natural resources for their livelihoods any good. And the companies suffer too, a lot of media focus and attention, and especially the financial impact. There's still going to be repercussions for decades on the financial impact to BP and the other operators of Deepwater Horizon following that event in the Gulf of Mexico last April. However, the SPCC plans are focused on above-ground storage tanks, and that's what we're going to be focusing on, is those regulations that apply to that. Originally in 1973, and this was in the aftermath, partially in the aftermath of the late 60s release from platform A21 off the coast of Santa Barbara, oil pollution prevention regulations were originally published. It was later absorbed into the Clean Water Act, and these provided a basis for trying to prevent releases and also responding to those emergencies should they occur. It provided requirements for prevention preparedness of, and response to oil discharges, and it was specific non-transportation related facilities. That's one of the things that you have to be really careful of with these SPCC plans, is where do they draw the line of what's covered and what's not. SPCC plans, and the context of what we're looking at, is primarily above ground storage tanks with quantities of oil above and I'll talk about the quantities, the different tiers, and the types of oil in a few minutes. And basically, the idea of all these regs is to put that SPCC plan together. As I mentioned, several historical events precipitated this. Specific to the SPCC plan itself, the main trigger was the Floreffe, Pennsylvania oil spill. This is a 4 million gallon oil storage tank, split apart and collapsed. I believe one of the root causes was a brittle fracture of the carbon steel, the tank itself, and you'll see some photographs in a few minutes that are very evident that it was rather cold at the time. And this is at an Ashland oil storage facility, and it was located near the Monongahela River, and the results of the spill had a significant impact on the river. We'll show you some aerial photos in a few minutes. And of course, in addition to all the environmental impacts, legal and financial impacts on the company are very significant. This is a photograph of the remnants of the tank from the oil spill. You can see it was during cold time of the year, and the tank structure, the construction techniques, the diking, there were a lot of issues there that are now addressed as part of the SPCC plan. This is an aerial photograph of the oil spill illustrating the significant impact and the amount of effort that you've got to put forth into responding to these should they occur. So in response to the spill, the EPA formed a task force to look at the federal regulations governing oil spills from above ground storage tanks. Again, that's the primary focus. There are some caveats for below ground storage tanks. We'll get into those shortly. So in response to that task force recommendation, the EPA modified the oil pollution prevention regulation in the 1990s and finalized the amendments to the SPCC requirements in 2002. Since then, the EPA, people have been implementing it. The EPA has been monitoring it. There are also some various state programs that we'll be talking about in a few minutes ago. But the EPA has amended the SPCC requirements of the Oil Pollution Prevention Act to extend compliance dates, clarify, tailor specific regulatory requirements. For those of you who are in there doing your SPCC plan, there's a lot of gray areas in terms of diking adequacy, what's covered, what's not covered, types of oils. And there's also a lot of things that are required by the letter of the law that in a lot of cases hardly represent a potential risk. These are all things that you've got to deal with as part of the SPCC plan compilation. And of course, it's going to continue to evolve with more clarifications as people ask questions, as people attempt to implement the specific requirements. This provides a little bit of background on the rule timeline. The final rule was promulgated in 2002. Various amendments have taken place, and there was several deadlines established. And I think a lot of it was because the economy and also the need to have a good trained staff of regulators to properly enforce it. Compliance dates have been pushed off quite a bit. A lot of people have enjoyed those relaxations. And the latest compliance date for formulating, for most people to formulate or update their SPCC plans is November 10th, 2011. And that's what everybody should be working towards right now. Of course, there are exceptions. I'll get to those in a few minutes. The key parts of the SPCC rule, as per this 2002 amendments, you've got an addition of Subpart A, which talks about the facilities and types of oil. Subpart B, which talks about petroleum oils and non-petroleum oils. Subpart C, that deals with other kinds of fats, oils, and greases, including things like vegetable oils and animal fats. Recently, we did an SPCC plan for a facility that has large quantities of coconut oil. And so there's a lot of things that are covered by this regulation. Again, it's very, very broad. Subpart D provides response requirements and clarifies those. Again, the key purpose of the rule was to provide requirements for prevention of, preparedness for, and response to oil discharges. There's a lot of other types of chemicals that you may be concerned about out there that certainly could be harmful to the environment, things that are very acidic, things that are very caustic. And those sort of things are important to address, but are not specifically covered by the SPCC. Again, the SPCC primary purpose and focus is oil discharges. And it's also for non-transportation related facilities. Once it hits the road, it's governed under different regulations that are not encompassed by the fixed facility SPCC plans. And the main objective is to prevent oil from reaching navigable waters and adjoining shorelines. So what does that mean? That means that you want to have design, you want to have containment like diking, and you want to have emergency response plans that are applying good or best practices to prevent that discharge and it ever for reaching navigable waters. And again, the focus is oil. Now, what does oil mean? Oil actually encompasses, by the SPCC requirements, a large number of chemicals that go way beyond just petroleum-based oils. Oil means any form, can be fats, which are solid above certain temperatures and typically at ambient conditions. Oils, animal greases, fish, vegetable oils, oils from seeds, nuts, fruits, kernels, other oils and greases. Of course, it includes petroleum, it includes fuel oil, things that are like lighter hydrocarbons, sludge, which are very, very heavy hydrocarbons, synthetic oils, mineral oils, oil refuse, and oil mixed with other wastes. You've also got a requirement to cover produced water from an exploration production facility that has certain quantities of oil in it. And again, we'll get to that. We'll get to that shortly. So the main focal point, the main thing I want to get across here is it covers a very wide range of activities. Now, based on the kind of material, the amount of analysis that you do, the amount of things that go in your plan may be very different. For example, fats, greases, things that are normally solid at ambient conditions, if there is a breach or a containment release and you're keeping the material heated so it's in a liquid state, and then if it's breached, it starts to cool down once it hits the ground and starts to solidify, those are the sort of things you can consider when looking at diking size, when looking at your emergency response activities, and what kind of requirements you have for emergency response. So again, you've got to consider very wide ranges of materials, but the types of materials and how you treat them and how they get handled in the SPCC plan can be quite different. And here's a challenging area. What are navigable waters? Let me go ahead and start with the definition, then we'll have a little discussion on that. Okay, based on Section 5027 of the Federal Water Pollution Control Act, the navigable waters include interstate waters, intrastate lakes, rivers, and streams, which are utilized by interstate travelers for recreational or other purposes, and intrastate lakes, rivers, and streams from which fish or shellfish are taken and sold in commercial commerce. Now, that doesn't sound like, if you read that, you probably look at that and go like, gee, that doesn't apply to me. I don't really have a lot of things that are near navigable waters. Well, the interpretation can be broad or very narrow, depending on what EPA region you're in or what local jurisdiction you're in. Our observation is there's a lot of variance in interpretation. Our recommendation is if you like some relaxation, talk to the region that's administering your SPCC. Go ahead and talk to your local state regulators, find out what their perspective is on it, and when in doubt, go ahead and take the extreme case. The extreme case, and what I've heard a lot of regulators say, if push comes to shove and you've had a spill and they're in charge of deciding if you get fines or not, is you can be almost in the middle of the desert, and if you have a release and it can, over long periods of time, eventually percolate into some sort of river stream or get into the ocean, then basically in their mind that's something that's covered by SPCC. Now, that's a very extreme interpretation. It's not shared by everybody. And so you're going to have to use a little bit of judgment to this in terms of what people are doing, what represents best practices, what works for your facility. My recommendation, again, is make a conscientious decision in light of your responsibility in terms of operating your facility to protect the environment and also to protect your company, and make a good decision in terms of how extensive you need to apply these kind of things, recognizing that your perspective on what makes sense may not jive with what a regulator's perspective is, especially if you've had a spill, they're in the political spotlight, and they're in charge of deciding whether to fine you or not. Okay, again, general applicability is a facility with oil storage capacity exceeding 1,320 gallons in above ground storage containers and also where the capacity of each storage container included in this aggregate amount is 55 gallons or greater. That could reasonably be these things that could reasonably be expected to discharge oil in harmful quantities into navigable waters of the United States or adjoining shorelines. Again, there's some words like reasonable, and we discussed navigable waters. These things can be, we have seen vast differences in interpretation. Again, highly recommend that you take a good look at your system and also work with the regulator to, and also if somebody's doing your SPCC plan, ask them if they're not doing it for you, how this compares to what other folks in your area are doing. And also there is a provision for underground storage tanks of 42,000 gallons or more. Okay, what are harmful quantities? Basically a discharge that violates applicable water quality standards or causes a sheen upon or discoloration of the surface of the water and may also have the potential to seep, leach, or flow into navigable waters. This gets back to, this is rather qualitative. You're looking at something that causes a sheen, has the potential to seep. These are things that are subject to interpretation. My recommendation is to get somebody who's familiar with the applications in your area, what the specific requirements are, and also make sure that you're doing something that makes sense. And when in doubt, do something that really shows that you're doing your job to protect the environment. Okay, there are some exemptions. Under the SPCC requirements, there are some exemptions that apply when calculating aggregate totals. Basically, if you've got containers with storage capacity less than 55 gallons of oil, they don't have to be considered in the aggregate. Permanently closed containers, motive power containers, wastewater treatment facilities are exempted. Hot mix asphalt and hot mix asphalt containers are exempted. Residential heating oil containers, pesticide application equipment and related mix containers, intra-facility gathering lines that are subject to DOT regs, and also underground oil storage tanks at nuclear power generation facilities. There are some very specific exemptions. If you fall in these categories, great, but it doesn't, most of these won't apply to the mainstream of a lot of the oil storage and production facilities that are out there. There are various categories of SPCC that are based upon the total oil storage capacity. And also, depending on this aggregate total, you may be in various tiers, either Tier 1 or Tier 2, which is termed a qualified facility, or as an all-other facility. What does this mean? Tier 1s are binned as facilities that are considered to have a lower environmental risk, and commensurate with that, you have less work to do for your SPCC plan. The all-other facilities category is the catch-all. If you can't fall into these lower tiers that require less work, you're in this all-other facility category, which means a full SPCC plan. It means a full SPCC plan signed off by a professional engineer. Tier 1 and Tier 2 facilities have an ability to use templates and have either no sign-off by a PE or a limited review and sign-off by a professional engineer. What type of professional engineer needs to sign off on that? What do they need to do for sign-off? We'll cover in just a few minutes. All right, this is a rather extensive table, and I'm not going to read through all of this. Basically, this defines the different tiers. As I mentioned, the all-other facility category is if you have greater than 10,000 gallons in aggregate above-ground oil storage capacity. And the Tier 2s is if you have this, but you have not had a discharge, and you also have lower quantities. It has lower requirements, and even lower requirements are associated with the Tier 1 facilities, which if you have 10,000 gallons or less in aggregate above-ground oil storage capacity, and you haven't had discharges that are significant, you can use templates and apply Tier 1 criteria to do a lot less work, which is a lot more maintainable too. So what are these Tier 1 requirements? You basically have to complete and self-certify. Self-certify. You do not need another consulting company or a professional engineer to review a Tier 1 SPCC plan. And the 40 CFR Part 112, which encompasses these SPCC plan requirements, does provide templates to help you do that. And again, the template is designed to be a simple SPCC plan then it eliminates or modifies certain requirements and provisions that generally do not apply to facilities that store or handle smaller volumes of oil. They're recognizing that it's a lower environmental risk, so they're saying let's do a little bit less effort. This template itself includes a facility description, self-certification. You do have to certify that the information is correct and that you've done a complete effort in terms of protecting the environment and putting together an SPCC plan. It does require a 5-year review, identification of storage containers and capacities, what secondary containment you've got, inspection, testing, record keeping, and training, security issues, and emergency procedures and notification. Security issues can be a real bugaboo, too, if you've got a remote facility that's normally unmanned, but you have to show that you're taking reasonable precautions to protect intrusion, tampering of the equipment, and release of material that can impact the environment. This is a simple example of an Appendix G template, and again, if you need some links to this information in an editable form, just go ahead and contact anybody here at Risk Management Professionals. We do a lot of these SPCC plans, pull them together for people. We're also happy to provide free outreach information like this webinar, and also links to get this information and at least get you started on this stuff if you qualify for Tier 1 and can self-certify. And again, more examples of the Appendix G template. And let's take a look at the Tier 2 facilities. Basically, the requirements are to complete a hybrid plan with either self-certification or parts of it PE certified. And there are some nuances in subparts B and C that kind of give you some guidance on when you need to do that. My recommendation for SPCC plans in general is start simple, take a good look at your system, containment, protection features, and go ahead and start simple and then kind of take it from there. And again, there are a lot of consultants out there to help you, but I wouldn't overdo the consultants. If you really need to do that, you really need good support, call somebody who knows what they're doing. If you get a PE sign-off, unfortunately the rule, I guess we'll talk more about this in a few minutes, but the rule is very loose in terms of the type of PE, what their background is. Talk to the person, ask them how many they've done, ask them what their background is, what kind of professional engineering certificate do they have, where are they licensed? Are they licensed in the state that you're doing your SPCC plan in, or do they have comity such that you're, that's comity, not comedy, that actually allows you to transfer their certifications and allows them to sign the SPCC plan in their state. These Tier 2 requirements do have some additional requirements for facility drainage, storage tanks, transfer operations, pumping, and facility process. So there's a little bit more to it. Also, this slide provides you with a little bit of background for what we recommend as a general contents of the plan, and it also links it back to 40 CFR Part 112, which defines the SPCC plan requirements. Again, key plan contents are you have to have an approval page and sign off, whether you're self-certifying or you get a PE certification. Again, a little warning about the PE certification. However, whatever went into making the rule or for SPCC plans, even though the PE is certifying that it was done in accordance with SPCC plan requirements, it still puts the ultimate burden in writing, and that's also in 40 CFR Part 112, of the oil spill prevention and the accuracy of the plan and follow-through of the plan back onto the facility owner-operator. So even if you get somebody to sign off on that as a PE, that doesn't absolve you of responsibility for the accuracy of the plan and what its contents are. And the contents include, again, management approval, compliance matrix to link back to 40 CFR Part 112, physical layout and facility diagrams, covered materials, discharge prevention measures, also countermeasures for discharge discovery. How are you going to notice that? A lot of times if you get a large tank, it'll be a low-level switch or some sort of alarm feature. Methods for disposal, contact lists for how you deal with the emergency, who do you get to make decisions, and how do you contact emergency response personnel from the municipality or whatever other agency can help you if you need some support. Also, various forms for reportable releases, procedures for discharge discovery, failure analysis, secondary containment, that's really important. And we'll also talk about, let me talk about it now just in case it doesn't come up later. Secondary containment is real important, and there's also an item in there on the EPA's checklist on permeability issues. If you've got a secondary containment, it may not be sufficient just to mound up some pebbles on the side of your tank to contain the oil, because it can seep through, and you've got to make a judgment on whether the permeability is low enough to be acceptable so that it functions as a berm or secondary containment. Again, the plan has to include the PE certification, inspection and testing, training, and also security. Something else that we do as part of our plans, as part of our general scope, is we'll take a couple extra hours and fill out, the EPA has checklists for their inspectors on how to go about and reviewing the SPCC plan and requirements. And those checklists, we usually will pre-fill them out as kind of a quality check on our own work to make sure the plan's complete. And then if an inspector does come and looks at the facility can pull that out and say, look, you can start here if you want to. This will help you out and also guide your efforts so you can focus on the things that are important for the SPCC plan. All of you know that regulators are humans just like everybody else, and they're not omniscient. They need some help focusing. They may not know your facility very well, so any help they can get to focus their efforts, I'm sure they'll appreciate. And also as the facility owner-operator, you can help them with their mindset on what's covered by the SPCC plan to help them keep their efforts focused too, and I think you'll appreciate that. Okay, subpart B, again, additional requirements based on if the facility is an onshore facility, onshore oil production facility, oil drilling workover, oil drilling production or workover facilities for offshore facilities. All those are encompassed by subpart B. Subpart B also includes design of facility drainage systems and secondary containment drainage, inspection of rainwater in secondary containment, testing of above-ground storage container integrity on a regular schedule, and also inspection of above-ground valves, piping, and other connections. Subpart C also provides additional requirements for animal fats, oils, and greases, as I mentioned before, fish and marine oils, vegetable oils, including oils from seeds, nuts, fruits, and kernels. And it has very similar requirements as Subpart B. The requirements for all other facilities. This is the more extensive SPCC plan, where if you don't fall into the Tier 1 and Tier 2 categories, you've got a significant requirement for doing the SPCC plan and getting a professional engineer sign-off. So this has to be a PE certified plan. It has to be in accordance with all the applicable requirements of Part 112 and whatever subparts B and C apply to you. And it includes all the things that were applied to for Tier 1 with these additional subpart issues, and also make sure that it's PE certified. So let's talk about that a little bit more. What is your professional engineer supposed to be doing, and what are they not supposed to be doing? They should be familiar with the requirements of the SPCC rule. They should have visited and examined the facility. They should verify that the plan has been prepared in accordance with good engineering practice, including consideration of industry standards and the specific requirements of the SPCC rule. Very broad. So there's a lot of judgment, and it's important that you get somebody who's conscientious, willing to do a good job and a thorough job looking over your facility and verifying that your SPCC plan is meeting the various requirements. If it doesn't, even if they sign it, it's still your responsibility as the facility owner-operator, so be careful whom you get to work with. Okay, also the PE is certifying that procedures for inspection and testing have been established such that you've got a process that the facility owner is following to inspect and test. That doesn't mean the PE is signing off that you're actually doing it. As an owner-operator, you're responsible for that. And the PE is also certifying that the plan is adequate for the facility. Let's talk about response requirements real quickly. There is a requirement for facilities to create and submit a facility response plan to the EPA regional administrator if it's classified in a substantial harm category. You also have to fill out the substantial harm criteria checklist to determine whether the facility poses substantial harm to the environment. Again, these are specific things that are done if you're in that substantial harm category. There's a checklist here that's a reprint out of various portions of Part 112 to help you identify if you're in that substantial harm category, and also fill out that checklist. So let's talk about one of the key things that have to get done here is the field verification walkdown. Whether it's done by you as a facility owner operator, whether it's done by the engineering team that includes the professional engineer that's reviewing your facility or supporting the creation of the SPCC plan, there's a requirement for a walk down to go out there and take a look at the facility and verify it's in accordance with the plan. Also, another thing about the field verification walkdowns and inspections, even if a regulator's out there inspecting it, even if the EPA visits you or one of your state agencies that's responsible for overseeing the implementation of the SPCC plan, even if they've been out there and they've walked it down, they've given you a clean bill of health, and they get in their car and drive home, that doesn't absolve you of responsibility for that you have a complete plan. It may be an inspector that's new, may not have looked at anything, they were maybe just spot checking a few items. Just because they've inspected it and given you a clean bill of health does not mean that's your get out of jail free card if there's a problem or some other inspector comes over and wants to dive into it a little bit more. So you as the owner operator have to make sure that all these things are done thoroughly, and field verification walkdown is an important part of that. So if you're doing that, what happens? It's mostly a visual. You're mostly going out there and looking at the general condition of the equipment, general size of the containment, and you're reviewing documentation such as the emergency response plan and call-out lists and those sort of things. When you're doing that, whenever we visit sites, you want to make sure you check with the facility owner-operator on what specific safety equipment may be required for that environment, hard hats, sea glasses, boots, jeans. When in doubt, make sure you've got that. For some oil production facilities, they may have a requirement for what's called, what most people call NOMEX, which is basically flame retardant coveralls or garments that you'd wear in case of a flash fire situation. That's unusual. Usually it's something like basic PPE, hard hat, safety glasses, boots, jeans. I usually take a pair of gloves if I'm doing a lot of ladder work or getting into a lot of dirty environments too. Tape measure or digital measuring device, I'll usually have both. I'll usually carry a 100-foot one of those roll-up tape measures, a simple 25-footer, and also the digital measuring device is really good. It's basically a laser device that pings a far wall and gives you an indication of the distance. They're pretty accurate too, but they're only useful for low light conditions. So if you're in the outdoors on a very sunny day, you may have a lot of difficulty using that kind of tool, and it also doesn't work well on certain types of reflective surfaces. Again, it's one of the tools in the toolkit, but you ought to have some backups. Also camera. We take a plethora of photographs when we're on site. It's really handy back at the office when you're compiling the SPCC plan, pulling the documentation together. And also, it's a very good record if the EPA comes and visits you or you've had an accident, that you've done a really thorough job on your field reconnaissance and taken a really good look at things. Pen and paper, obviously, to take notes. Some people I've seen actually take a small voice recorder so they don't have to be writing as much. But 6 1 1/2 dozen the other. That can be useful in some circumstances. I've used them before under very specialized circumstances. Usually for an SPCC walkdown, I don't feel a real need for that. A small calculator, most cell phones will do the trick right now. And also, what do you need a golf ball for? Well, if you've got a concrete pad, sometimes they can be useful for identifying which direction the flow would go if there is a spill, and you can kind of tell which way it's sloped. Other things that are really handy is a tool belt. Just a standard, go to your Home Depot or Lowe's and grab a $15 tool belt. You'll really be glad you did. It's got pockets for things because you're walking around the field, you got a lot of different things that you're carrying, and it's usually because it's a tool belt, it has a really nice clip for your tape measure device too. Tips for secondary containment adequacy. The key thing is that the containment system has to have the ability to contain the oil such the oil will not escape the containment system before cleanup occurs. There's a lot of issues there. Before cleanup occurs, you got to look at percolation issues, the porosity of the berm or diked area. We usually will do measurements, sometimes with very amorphous shaped berms that can be a little challenging, but usually we'll take measurements and do some simple calculations to verify that the containment size is adequate for the tanks within. Something else to consider for some materials is sloshing effects, such that the material can slosh out if you get a major release very quickly. Also, sometimes you've got small quantities of material in a very wide area with very short containment wall heights. You know, it's okay to look at it and go like, gee, this is huge. It's more than adequate, and document it like that in your SPCC plan walkdown notes. If it's a large quantity of oil and a specific containment designed for that, yeah, it's probably good to do some measurements and some calculations. If it's a very small quantity of material and a very large containment area, you may just use some judgment there. Also, some tips and recommendations about drain valves. They usually should be capped, or you can have a valve that's kept in a closed position on the drain valves. Usually what you want to do is make sure that you've got some mechanism for ensuring that that connection is closed and or capped in some manner. And in some cases, you want to make sure that you have some sort of either double valve or a valve and a cap to ensure that there's adequacy of containment even if one of the devices is leaking. Also, tips and recommendations. The photograph on the left is not a good example of a pumping area or a filling area. Basically, you don't have concrete or any sort of pad such that if there's a spill, it can permeate into the ground. A good example of a fueling area or an oil transfer area is on the right. If there's not a lot of material and if there is a spill, there's some sort of concrete pad to contain the spill so that you can have a controlled mechanism for cleanup and so it won't soak into the ground. Other tips and recommendations, in the left, you've got a situation where there's no secondary spill containment, such that if there is an overflow, it can go into a local drain or even run outside the building. A good example of secondary containment is on the right. It's a good and maybe not so good example now that I look at the photograph carefully. Right now you got 3 drums on a single containment area. You want to verify that that pad underneath is at least the capacity of 1 55-gallon drum. I have seen cases, this one has a grid on it to keep the drums up. I have seen cases where there isn't a grid and the drums are right in the containment. And you've got to keep in mind that the containment can actually, the drum can displace the amount of volume that you've got in the containment. That's also true for those 2 large green tanks that we saw a couple of slides ago. Other tips and recommendations, drains, service ports need to be plug capped or double valved, and you need to have a proper means of secondary spill containment. Again, the example on the left really is not adequate. The example on the right is much better in terms of if there is a spill, it's better containment, and they've also got them properly double valved or padded off. A situation that's not so good is the one in the current photograph. This is a case it's not the camera that's tilted, it's actually the storage tote that's on a series of pallets that it's listing, and it doesn't look very stable. There's no secondary containment. It can basically go right in the ground, and if you look at the ground, you'll see a shaded area where there has been spills before. There's no cap, no double valving, and like I mentioned, it's a very unstable platform. So this would be something you don't want to see at your facility, and if you do, you want to take some pretty near-term steps to take care of it, clean it up, and apply appropriate practices that you'll establish as part of your SPCC program. Other tips and recommendations, multiple vessels sharing 1 secondary spill containment area. Again, you want to consider what your total volume is should the worst or largest vessel leak into there, and how much containment would be available given the fact that other devices or equipment may be in that containment dike. Now, one of the things that you can consider, obviously, is physics. If your larger container is actually below the level of the containment wall and it's displacing some of the containment volume, well, when you're looking at the overall volume that goes in the containment, obviously, once the levels equilibrate between the containment and the vessel itself, you're still going to have some material in the vessel. So it won't be all the contents of the vessel that will have to go into the dike, only that down to the point where the levels equilibrate. Other tips and recommendations for double wall tanks. Double wall tanks do not require secondary spill containment. If you're looking at flow metering devices, liquid level gauges, basically that goes back into some mechanism for monitoring the potential for spill. So double wall tanks can be pretty handy in a lot of circumstances, and here you're looking at cases of diesel and gasoline storage. Other tips and recommendations is spill kits. Spill kits, when you're doing your SPCC verification, you ought to be inspecting them, verifying that they're complete, and if they've been used or the seal's been broken, that the contents have been replenished. A lot of times if people use something, they'll go like, oh, we'll take care of it later, and nobody ever gets to put the replenish the materials in the spill kit. They may not be on an inspection program. Maybe take a look at them every quarter at least. And also signage. You want to have some sort of clear identification so people know where they are. If they're kind of in the back somewhere, maybe a little sign posted that identify where the spill kit is so people can find it during an emergency. It may also be part of your training program where you roll out the SPCC plan and make sure your personnel are appropriately trained in that. And also for exploration production facilities, make sure you've got strategically located bins with spill response equipment, again, to help you maintain that overall responsibility to the environment. So let's talk about compliance dates. Basically, if you've already got a facility operating, you've had to do an SPCC plan, and you want to make sure that's amended or updated no later than November 10th, 2011. If it's something that's been operating but after August 2002, you want to make sure that you implement an SPCC plan no later than, again, that magic date of November 10th, 2011. After November 10th, 2011, if you've got a new facility coming online, you just want to make sure that you've got an SPCC plan in place, people trained, totally effective, before beginning operations. That means it's got to be signed off, all the inspections done, and you really should have that in place before beginning operations. So right now, November 10th, 2011 is the magic date. Given the fact that there have been a number of extensions, given the fact that there's been a lot of pressure politically because the April 2010 Macondo well release, I wouldn't see that as being extended again, but who knows. Right now, I wouldn't count on it. I would gear up to make sure your plan's in place by that time. Also, I mentioned state programs. Some state programs have adopted programs similar to the SPCC. In addition to meeting federal requirements, there may also be some specific state requirements. A lot of states do have this. Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Louisiana, Florida, Washington, Oregon, Maryland, Delaware are some examples. California also has state programs, but primarily it's just administering the federal requirements of the SPCC. Now, are there acute differences? No. The fact is you're looking at pretty much the same animal, but be aware of your state requirements. Make sure they're met. And if you're doing a whole lot differently, take a second look at what the requirements are or call somebody. So if you're doing it, here are some resources. You've got, the EPA's got a website and checklists, a lot of materials available there. Oil pollution prevention regs are on the URL that's identified there. There's some information centers and also an SPCC hotline. Also, what I'd recommend in terms of your emergency response, we've been cycled into this on numerous occasions. If you do have an emergency, if you do have a spill, there's been a lot of discussion in the regulatory communities on how to handle that. One of the things that gets facilities that are operating a site that has potentially hazardous materials, the thing that gets them into trouble the most is hesitation. Hesitation to call the agency, call the municipal emergency responders. Now, that doesn't mean willy-nilly calls for nothing, but if you think that there may be a potential for a need for additional assistance, it's good to call them. You can tell them that, hey, that you're addressing it right now and you think you've got it under control, and you'll advise them shortly. Notification requirements are critical. Not being notified gets people into a lot of trouble. And even if it's a non-emergency spill, if you've had a spill, you've contained it, contained it, you've addressed it, you're calling your cleanup contractor. You also need to provide notification. It's really easy to pick up the phone and just say very, very simply, hi, my name is so-and-so. This is a non-emergency notification. Our opinion right now is we do not need agency response, but we wanted to notify you guys of the spill that we've had. It's rare that they'll do anything other than just write down and you've fulfilled your notification requirements, and you've made sure that you're not going to get in hot water for that later. So anyhow, again, my name's not Teresa Marion, but I will take questions and try to help out with any specifics on the SPCC plans. Okay, fair enough. I'll tell you what, we'll just go ahead. I'll yak for a couple more minutes and just remind you a couple of things. If you do have questions for follow-up, you're welcome to call us at any time. The number on the screen works just fine for tracking down folks on the Northeast. Our office in California is 949-282-0123. You're also welcome to contact our 877-532-0806 number, and that can be connected anywhere to our Irvine, California office, our Walnut Creek office, our Houston office, or our Philadelphia office. So anyhow, if you do have questions, feel free to give us a call, and we'll be glad to help out, point you in the right direction, and of course, if you need some support, just let us know. Okay? Okay, sure. Give me a chance to get a sip of coffee. That's great.
All right. So for Tier 1 facilities, the 5,000-gallon requirement for maximum tank size, does this include underground tanks as well?
No, that's strictly above ground. All right, we'll sign off. And also, because as November 10th draws near, we are going to be providing this fairly periodically to provide you with updates. And also, this particular recording, along with other SPCC training materials, will be updated onto our outreach site at www.rmpcorp.com/outreach.html. Thanks for your attendance, and also thanks for the good questions, too.